The summer I got a job here, I was 17, and it was a good year. Ellen Ditzworth used to work the hot dog stand, and we'd sneak cigarettes under the beams of the Dragon Slayer ride, cringing and giggling as the cars went overhead, dripping water all over us. Wet hands and damp cigarettes. But it was near her station, and I think she found it funny to get splashed. It was out of the way, too. It was always quiet and cool down there, even in the summer heat. If any of the ride-goers smelled our cigarette smoke as they hurtled overhead, they didn't say anything. One time when we fumbled around and flirted, I kissed her fingers and they smelled like an ashtray. I still think about it to this day. I was 22 when they offered me the winter job. Ellen was long gone by then. No more bright red short shorts and poorly shaven legs that she'd invite me to stroke, under the pretense of showing just how bad she was with a razor. There were other girls, but by the time the final summer rolled around, I'd long felt uncomfortable hanging out with new hires. Sometimes I'd stand there listening to them talk, and I'd feel lonelier than I had when I was by myself. I was thinking about my future around this time when the manager told me he had an opportunity for me to make good cash. They needed someone to stick around and keep the place ticking while everyone went back to the real world. Usual guy had walked, and they needed someone bad. The last day before the park shut for winter was always Halloween, and that was only because it had a fireworks show. After that, it turned into a ghost town, and I'd be on my own. I'd get a trailer to sleep in, and I could use my own car to get to the closest shop. The park would pay some for my gas, not all of it, but enough to help out. Only real problem was I'd be alone. Not that the place was a desert island. There were 2 towns within easy driving distance, and I could have friends around as long as we didn't mess with the rides. But other than that, I'd be the only staff member on hand for an entire 4 months. Security guard and janitor rolled into one. I agreed, but I told him when the park reopened in March, I'd be done. I figured it was time to move on. Get a degree like some of my friends had. Or maybe my dad could help me out with a job somewhere. World was wide open to me, and I'd figured I'd sit on my ass all winter, make a shit ton on overtime, and then go on to some new adventure where I'd meet another Ellen Ditzworth or 2. Yesterday, I turned 38, and I'm still in the park. Government signs my checks now. Couldn't tell you when that happened exactly. Probably after the media got wind of Denise Surrey, who broke in with her friends and never left. A lot of kids have gone missing here over the years, but she was the one who went mainstream. Her parents were doctors and she had blue eyes, so she got just enough attention to get the news cameras out. When the fuss died and the media moved on to its next story, some government guys came and installed 8-foot steel palisade fences, gave me the keys to the only gate, and scarpered real quick. Gave me a funny feeling seeing 4 men in suits, barrel-chested with pistols on their hips, climb into an unmarked vehicle and accelerate out of the parking lot so fast the back of the car fishtailed. One of them looked over his shoulder at the park, and he was so scared it was like he was looking at a mushroom cloud. I was the one who found Denise. She'd gone crawling headfirst down the Astro Missile water slide. One of those up and down kind of slides that have you bouncing along on a padded dinghy. Rides like that are usually open top, but this had long sections in a closed tunnel with LED lights to look like stars. Thing is, depending on weight, some people would catch air and hit the top of those tunnels going 20 miles per hour, maybe more. We used to take turns going in there to pull out any teeth that had got stuck in the roof. 15 years later, and that tunnel mouth looked like something out of a nightmare. Fairy moss covering the opening. Darkness inside heavier than the night around it. Bone dry and with no obvious way to safety. Denise died of thirst. They think she was in there for 6 days, crawling around in the pitch black looking for an exit that should never have been more than 100 feet away. There were signs something was wrong with this place back when it was still open. I just didn't register them. There were the injuries and accidents that are common in every water park, but we had a couple hundred serious ones every year, usually one a day. Tried to mitigate it with safety measures, but half the time they didn't work. Radios would bug out when you'd try sending a warning. Repair guys would get lost, calling up angry saying the road just kept going right forever, and they'd had enough of this shit. Out of order signs would go missing. Sometimes kids would insist some staff member had waved them through on a closed attraction. They'd be so adamant, I'd started to believe them. I think the manager did too. He made it a policy to have name tags on us at all times, and if the kids said whoever gave them the go-ahead didn't have one, he'd tell us all to forget it, like it wasn't even worth trying to figure out who needed a disciplinary. I had it happen once where I radioed to the guy at the top of one slide and told him to stop any kids coming down. The last one had come out bleeding and looked unresponsive, and I wanted to check on him. I remember pulling him out of the water and looking at this boy all slack and pale as a sheet of paper with blue lips. So fucking cold it hurt just to hold him. And I wondered if I was holding someone dead when out of nowhere another kid slammed into me so hard I went under. Scared me shitless, because for a second or two it was like I couldn't see the surface of the pool. Almost like there wasn't one. Just blue forever and ever. Before I could start to panic, my feet found the floor and I surfaced, only to see the kid I'd been holding seconds ago standing there looking worried. He was the picture of good health. Asked if I was okay, said sorry for hitting me when he came out the slide, but really it was my own dumbass fault for standing there in the first place. Guy at the top swore on his life he'd never got any radio message from me. I put it all down to the head injury, which was bad enough the owner made someone drive me to the emergency room. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was the park having its fun with me. Could have been worse. You could say it likes to play tricks, but those tricks are mean as hell, and over the years they've only got worse. Despite all I've told you so far, the first winter alone wasn't as bad as you might think. Creepy as hell walking around all those rides that were usually so busy and full of life. Tarpaulins pulled across all those pools, big and small, moving with gentle susurrations in the icy winds. It wasn't great in the day, overcast and dreary, the air seemingly blue. But at night, it was even worse. I made those rounds quickly, stopping sometimes to summon what little bravery I had to shine a light in the pitch-black toilets, or to check on the changing stalls dotted around the place. Things went missing a lot, moved around. Once, one of the rides came to life at 3 a.m., and I woke to the sound of tinny music echoing throughout the park. But winter came and went without any real incident. First day the park reopened, I went to see the manager and slipped in some water. Broke my left arm and did a number on my back. Owner was so scared of being sued he threw money at me. Told me he'd cover the medical bills and sit me up in my trailer and pay me to do nothing. Nothing. What was I going to do? I'd arranged to start another job on a construction site in a few weeks, and there was no hope of me doing that kind of work with my injuries. I needed money, and I had no other way of making it. I agreed to stick around until I felt better. But unfortunately, I never felt better. Winter soon rolled around again, and the same deal as last time was back on the table. He needed someone on site, and I needed money. I took it, thinking another few months in the park wasn't so bad. I was wrong. Second time round was a lot worse. Part of it was me. 23 years old and with a bad back, drinking most nights and struggling with the prescription painkillers. Spent most days haunted by the strange feeling that my life's honeymoon phase was over. Hardly any friends accepted my invite to come spend a couple of weeks, and those that did weren't around long. Couldn't tell you if that was just us growing apart, as friends often do, or the park's strange influence. Dave came around with his girlfriend for a couple nights. She grouched the whole time. Hated sleeping in the trailer while I stayed in a tent outside. But she hated the park too. Said she felt watched all the time. Trip was cut short when we found her screaming one morning. She was pointing at one of the slides, saying something had come out of it and was in the pool swimming around. But when we looked, we didn't see nothing. She did have a hell of a bite on her ankle, though. Funny shape to it. Dave looked at it and got real freaked out. They left in a hurry. Another car's tires screeching as it hauled ass out of here at top speeds. Never did figure out what happened. But if she didn't like the park, well, I guess I didn't like her either. Not that I was much safer. Found myself getting caught up like crazy doing basic odd jobs. Things broke all the time, even if they'd been fine for years and years. And then, one night, I came into my trailer to find a drowned possum on the little kitchen table. Poor thing was soaked in chlorine water that dripped onto the floor in a puddle. No marks going to or from it, like it just appeared there out of thin air. It stank like hell, though. It had clearly been dead for days and days. I gingerly dropped it into a garbage bag using a pair of tongs and threw the lot in the dumpster. But I still couldn't spend more than a few seconds in the trailer without gagging. So I slept in the tent instead. Pitched it as close as I could without picking up that smell. But I had a bad feeling the whole time I set it up. Like I was being watched. By the time I was climbing inside, it was midnight, and I was desperate to get to sleep and see the cold night turn to day. Barely an hour later, and I had to climb back out of the tent because the trailer door was banging in the wind. Okay, I told myself as I shuffled over in my tighty-whities, arms wrapped around my chest for warmth. That's my own stupid fault for leaving it open. I closed it in a hurry and went back to the tent, but stopped, dead in my tracks when I saw the zipper was pulled shut. I hadn't left it like that. I didn't know what to do. My brain went into two directions at the same time. One said I was mistaken. I'd closed the tent and I'd just forgotten it. The other side said something, or someone had crawled inside and was waiting for me. It set the whole thing up as a trap, and the best thing to do was get in my car and drive until the sun rose. But I was already half cut and I knew I shouldn't be driving. The skeptical half of my brain made an appealing case. The world isn't a nightmare, it said. It can look like one sometimes, but it isn't real. If you hear a bump in the night, you go looking and find it was all nothing, and you take a deep breath, laugh at yourself for getting scared, and move on. Still, it took everything I had just to take a step towards the tent, and I shone my light at it, hoping to see some sign of something in there. By the time my hand was on the zipper, I was shaking like a leaf and rethinking my ethical code of not driving drunk. But when emotions get that high, it's like you run on autopilot. Must be a survival thing. I opened the flap without really telling myself to, and then I was looking inside my tent and there was nothing there. I crawled inside quick as I could, pulled the zipper back the other way, and tried to go to sleep. I settled down for maybe another 30 minutes when something's hand pressed against the tent wall, and that was when I started screaming. The way it came at me, palm open, fingers spread, tent fabric stretching to near breaking point, makes my skin crawl just to remember it. Long fingers that tapered to a point, almost razor sharp, and a palm not much larger than a golf ball, even if the fingers spanned a dinner plate. In the nightmare reality of the moment, I saw it the way I might see a spider, equal parts disgust and terror. I had to get away, and I backed up so fast I wound up rolling the whole tent like a hamster ball. Lost the zipper in the panic. Didn't find it again until the last scream finally left my lips, and I was forced to catch my breath in the silence of the empty night, accepting that whatever was out there was either laughing its ass off at me or waiting patiently. Either way, I was at its mercy. Only thing I could do was collect myself and leave the damn tent. When I finally climbed free, there was no one waiting for me. Only a couple wet footprints going to the nearest pool. I considered pulling the tarpaulin back and looking, but I was already scared shitless and had no courage remaining. Instead, I ran into the trailer, slammed the door shut, barricaded it with every last piece of furniture that wasn't bolted to the floor, and fell asleep with the smell of rotten meat filling my lungs. Come morning, I was thankful for the sunlight and the feeling that last night's events were just a dream. After that, I locked my trailer door every night, and I never slept in that tent again. No more possums, but it isn't uncommon for me to find scratches and dents in my door each morning. Nothing serious, but looks to me like the probing of a curious animal. A couple days later, something locked me in the boys' bathroom near the east end of the park. I'd only gone in because one of the faucets was running. I just turned it off when the door slammed shut and I couldn't get it open again. Had to kick the lock out, which wasn't an easy thing to do. First kick, I nearly broke my ankle. Second time hurt just as bad, and I had to take a breather to cope with the pain. Found myself pacing and occasionally stopping to listen for any sign of someone waiting for me outside. Someone I could shout at, blame it all on. Anything to keep the anger churning and not let it turn to fear. It was a full hour before I got panicked enough to give it my all and finally broke the lock. Burst into the cold air all red-faced and flustered, and found the park silent as a graveyard. Just those tarpaulins waving gently in the breeze. I learned some important lessons that winter. If you feel watched, feel like you're walking into a situation someone planned, it's because you are. When the park reopened, I was out of there without a moment's hesitation. Finally got that job on a construction site, and it lasted all of 3 weeks before I hurt my back again. Spent the rest of the summer laid up on my dad's sofa drinking and watching daytime TV. Got a call off the manager around August, and he told me it had been a bad summer. Not only had the cops been sniffing around like crazy because some poor kid went missing in the area, but they'd had twice as many injuries as before. Said he just spent the day in court, hearing testimony from the parents of some kid who'd never walk or feed himself again after he hit his head on one of the rides. He sounded pretty beat up about it. He wasn't the best boss, but it wasn't like we worked for Mr. Burns either. Poor guy was way out of his depth. Anyway, part of the court settlement was that he had to have staff members on site 24/7. I'd done it twice before, and he was desperately in need of someone who knew the job. I nearly said no, But he told me it was me, or some 17-year-old lifeguard who'd shown interest in the job. And I didn't like the thought of that. God help me, I accepted. And when I went back for the third time, I took a gun. And this time I trusted my instincts. If I walked past a changing stall and heard the shower running, I'd let it run. Hour later, it'd be turned off again. If I saw someone had left the lights on in the staff room, I'd let them stay on until morning when I could deal with it in the comfort of daylight. Flushing toilets, wet footprints, open doors. I learned to stop sweating the little things, and 9 times out of 10, they went away on their own. Pretty soon I found myself laughing at them. A big fat wallet sitting in the middle of a solitary lounger that had been dragged into the moonlight. A phone ringing from somewhere in the depths of a maintenance hatch. Those kinds of crude tricks weren't going to work on me, I decided. Thought I had it all figured out and there was nothing left for that place to show me. And then the park ate a drifter. Or something did anyway. Did it right in front of me, too. I found the guy sleeping in one of the brick-and-mortar bathrooms. We gotta keep those things warm enough to stop the pipes bursting, so I guess they make decent enough shelter. He was an agitated old fuck. Called me all sorts as I told him to clear off. He didn't make for the main exit, though. It wasn't like he parked a car in the lot, was it? Instead, he just made a beeline for the nearby hills. No fences in that part of the park back then. Only open fields moving into woodland. His plan was to just walk into the wilderness in the middle of winter, and I wondered if I was actually marching some guy to a cold death. I remember looking at his shoes and seeing the backs of his heels exposed, and I realized I couldn't let him do that. Snow was due to fall that night, and I knew it was going to get real bad out there. "Hey!" I cried out while slowing to a stop. "Look, man, it's late. I'm sure—" My words died out. I didn't really know what to say when he turned to face me. He was angry and tired, and I knew he wasn't really going to be thankful for some randomer's charity, but that didn't mean I shouldn't try. For the moment, the only sound was the tarpaulin of the large pool to our right. Was just about to cough up some more words when his feet went sideways. His body rotated around his center of mass, and the next part of him to touch solid ground was his head. It made a noise that makes my teeth ache just to think about. A percussive, almost musical note that really shouldn't be made by a human skull. The blood that sprayed across the tiles reminded me of when I'd go paintballing with my friends. I remember looking down at it and noticing a couple loose teeth. Strange feeling. For a few seconds, everything turned to a kind of white noise, as ancient instincts rooted me to the spot with fear. Paralyzed me. A million thoughts went through my head. The guy was dead. Something had taken him. That blood used to be inside of him. I have blood inside of me. Does my blood look like that? These thoughts were like the sparks that fly off a loose electrical wire. But I was stuck, mired in them until the whistling in my ears faded, and I heard something being dragged across the floor. The guy hadn't even gone that far. He'd flown about 8 feet and landed just on the edge of the pool. His legs were in the water, hidden behind the tarpaulin, and only his top half was on dry land. His head was a ruin of blood and matted hair. But he still managed to look at me for just a second, before he slid the rest of the way below the water with a quiet splunk. The realization he was alive kicked my ass into gear, and I ran over to the circuit box and hit the button that pulls back the pole cover. The machine ran loud as it drew the blue heavy sheet back across the water. Felt like an eternity waiting for it. When it was finally over and I could look down into the water and see clearly, there was no one there. Not even a cloud of blood polluting the pool. Nothing. I felt like I was going insane. And I even looked over and double-checked that guy's plastic bag was still where he dropped it, just so I could be sure I hadn't made the entire thing up. I really didn't know what to do. The only thing in that water were a couple leaves that had made it in there over fall, but that was it. And then I saw it. I can't explain it easily. It was a sudden overlap of realities. A bit like the hollow cube illusion where it can be two things at once. Without ever taking my eyes off it, that pool became every deep body of water I'd ever seen. All of them, all at once. It was every calm and glassy ocean surface, with rays of diffused light leading into unseen depths. Every lake with murky kelp fingers reaching up out of the dark. Every flooded basement with black and brackish water. I could smell the stagnant water, could feel the breeze you get standing on the coast, taste the salt, all of it at once. And something moved in those infinite waters, and it was big. It was like the first time I saw the Grand Canyon big. Like when you get on a plane and see the ground pull away so quickly it loses perspective. Whatever was down there was coming right at me. And I'm not ashamed to say I pissed my pants. An ocean full of stars was down there, and the thing swimming towards me had a body that obscured entire nebulae. I felt vertigo come over me, and I backed away and I slipped in the blood, and then I woke up a few hours later and started screaming. I had to clean up in the morning, and I had to pull the tarpaulin back across. Machine only goes one way, so I had to do it with a pull stick, and it made me feel sick just to go near it. Every time I got close, I started to feel dizzy again. When I finally mustered the courage to look, there was the same old pool it had always been. But I'd never shake the feeling I had when I was looking down in it and saw teeth like tectonic plates. When summer rolled back around, I saw a bunch of kids in that pool and had to go be sick in a bush. The thought of them sharing space with that thing. Jesus. After that, I felt like I belonged to the park, weird as it sounds. Manager didn't have to fight me to get to stick around for a fourth winter, or a fifth, or a sixth. The rest of the world didn't feel so real to me anymore. Sitting and eating dinner with my father while he lectured me on my prospects, getting a beer with an old friend who was passing through. I felt like I'd gone into fucking space and seen the world was flat. And now I had to just come back and pretend like I cared about whether my soda was diet or not. Not long after that, the park had its last ever summer. It had gone too far by that point. Government was looking to close it all down on account of the accident, and the manager was down the station every other day for questioning. 4 kids missing that year alone. I found one of them folded up inside a pool filter, but didn't report it on the account of not wanting the attention. The rest I don't know about. I was told I'd be paid another month or so after the closure until a demolition crew came in. But no one ever arrived. Just me, this place, and a back that's getting worse with each new winter. I don't patrol at night anymore. Little by little, the park has become something unfamiliar to me. Grass growing between old tiles. Pool water the color of cut grass and engine oil. Even in the day, you can see things moving around down there. And the smell of chlorine no longer fills the air. Now it's the heavy stench of rotten algae and dead water. And sometimes the tang of the salty ocean that I've learned to avoid like the plague. Makes me see stars in the corner of my vision, and I don't like it. My dreams are bad enough. Drowning in the dark. Something huge bearing down on me. I've woken up more than a few times and vomited up salt water. I can't bring myself to think what any of it means because I just don't want to know. Last time I went in the park after dark, I had a close call. Worst of my life. I've been thinking about leaving ever since, but I worry there's not much else out there for me at this stage. That, and I kind of feel guilty I didn't save all those kids with the cameras. Urban explorers, they call themselves. And I say kids, but really they were college students who record videos for something called TikTok. Anyway, they came prepared. Scouted the park, even scouted me, working out my routine and where my trailer is so they could avoid my general line of sight. I had no clue they'd watched me for a whole day. Once they figured I was passed out or asleep, they drove their fan as close to the fence they could find, climbed the top, and hopped on over. For about an hour, they got what they wanted. I watched the footage 100 times. Broken down toilets covered in graffiti. Smashed windows and broken glass covering the floor. Old pools full of ancient water covered in thick, brackish scum. You can hear the glee in their voices. That kind of urban decay was their bread and butter. And they were good at it too. They stayed quiet, didn't shout or break anything. They just filmed. Wasn't until they decided to try rowing out to the castle that things took a turn. I came too late. What got me out of bed was a scream. Maybe a few of them. It was blurry and I came to around 3 a.m. and still a little tipsy, my head foaming at the edges with a half-remembered dream of a hollow world filled with water. As soon as I saw the van, I realized someone had gotten inside the park and I hadn't just been dreaming the sounds of splashing water, and panicked. But by the time I went in there myself, the place was silent. I really didn't want to search it at night. I hadn't gone in there after dark for a few years and things had only gotten worse. Set something off inside me. A kind of spiritual Geiger counter is how I think of it. An intense primordial warning system that made the shadows around me look almost infinitely deep. More than that, I guess, it felt alien. It sounds stupid, but it really did feel like I wasn't on the same planet anymore. I don't know. That part might just be all in my head, but that's how it felt that night. I'd pushed myself just about as far as I was willing to go when I heard it. A rhythmic, hollow knocking. It was coming from one of the largest pools in the park. A shallow, kid-friendly one we called the castle, because it had a giant jungle gym in the center. A kind of spaghetti mess of platforms and climbing bars and slides that kids loved. I followed the sound and saw a pile of rucksacks and even a large camera on the very edge of the pool, and there, just a couple meters away, was a rowboat. The idiots had brought it with them. Probably thought they were being smart by avoiding the water below. At least they tied it off so it was easy for me to pull it back in. I gave it a curious inspection, shivering at the mere thought of floating across that nightmare water in something so flimsy, and was ready to leave it until the morning when I heard a quiet splashing. Something had climbed out of the water, and my heart dropped as I instinctively flicked the torchlight towards the sound of dripping water and saw a thin, shivering shape climb onto the lowest steps of the castle. It looked gray and sickly, and then it started whimpering, and I realized I was looking at a girl, college-aged with stringy hair, and an outfit that might have been colorful before she'd gone in the water, but now it was just the color of ash and moss. At a glance, she almost didn't look human anymore. She looked more like a starving animal, shell-shocked and shaking. I shouted out to her, but it was as if she couldn't hear me. She dragged herself up onto a dry platform and curled up in a ball in the far corner, knees pulled to her chest, and wide eyes locked into a 1,000-yard stare. And something was in that water. It came close to the surface, displacing small branches and causing the thick pond scum to bulge but never break. From the looks of things, it was circling the castle, and in some parts where the algae wasn't so thick, I caught the faintest glimpse of colorless scales the size of my hand, and a thick, muscular trunk. Sometimes it seemed to bump up against the castle, like it knew the girl was nearby, but it didn't know how to get to her. The whole thing shook and she'd whimper extra loud, but she still didn't show any signs of becoming lucid. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about leaving her until morning. She was unresponsive and looked like she was just going to stay in the same place. Wouldn't it be better just to go and get her when the sun was up? I thought. But that was a pretty fucked up thing to think. She wasn't safe there. I wasn't safe just standing inside of the water, and she was on some old piece of plastic held together with rusting bolts. What if it collapsed? What if something came out of the water? God knows it could happen. Something had touched my tent all those years ago. Who says it wouldn't walk on out to take her? At some point, I made the decision. Don't know exactly what did it, but I think it was the sounds she was making. That and the knowledge she'd been in there. God knows what she'd seen. I had to have sympathy. She needed help, and I was the only one around who could give it. So once something deep inside me clicked, I knew I had to move quickly before the fear started to fuck with my head. I grabbed the rope and began to pull the boat towards me. I wasn't sure what would happen. Half expected something to breach the water like a hungry shark and swallow the boat whole. But instead, whatever was circling the castle just slunk into the depths and stayed out of sight. Somehow that wasn't even worse, and I found myself scanning the water obsessively as I worked up the courage to get in the boat. I tried to keep the momentum though. Didn't let myself start thinking or doubting myself. I just climbed in awkwardly, 1 foot at a time, damn near shitting myself when the whole thing wobbled, and I briefly felt like I was gonna lose balance. But I managed it, and soon I was sitting down and using the oars to pull myself through the water. As I rowed, my brain moved along in different directions. Part of me was almost watching myself, like from above, and asking over and over, "What the fuck are you doing?" While another watched that water for the slightest sign of life. And a third part of my brain was watching me for signs I was going to crumble from the adrenaline and ice-cold fear coursing through my veins. Each time the oars broke the water, I kept waiting to see something coming after me. And I was about halfway there when I realized that, if it was big enough, it could just bowl the whole boat over, like a shark knocking a surfer off his board. It was too far to turn back when I saw the water rise in the distance. Again, it didn't break the surface, but it came close and sent a couple waves rolling across the entire pool where they lapped against the distant edge. They made the whole boat rock side to side like it was just a bit of driftwood. When the bulge in the water appeared again, it was on the other side of the boat, and I made the terrible decision to stop rowing and look over the edge. There was no bottom to the pool, but whatever was down there wasn't swallowing continents anytime soon, at least. Hard to pin size down, but based on the steely blue fins that slid by close beneath me, that didn't really matter. It could eat me, easy enough, and that was all that mattered. Hell, I wasn't even sure if it was a fish or a squid or something else entirely. but I was pretty sure it still had a mouth somewhere in that murk. I gave the boat a gentle knock. Nothing serious. Not enough to roll it, but enough to let me know it was interested in me. I decided I couldn't just stay there floating in one place forever. I had to move. I grabbed the oars and threw all caution to the wind. The sooner I got off the water, the better. Sure, I'd have to figure out how to get back, but that was a problem for later. Right there and then, all that mattered was the rising terror and disgust that took all my strength to keep from bubbling up into full-blown panic. As soon as the boat began to move, the creature slid out of view again. Didn't know if I ought to be relieved or even more afraid, but I took advantage of the lull in its activity to close the distance, and once close enough, I pulled the boat over to the same steps the girl had climbed. Once there, I secured it with a bit of rope and hopped onto the first step, cringing at the way the ice-cold water felt slick and slimy against my ankles. The girl flinched at my touch, but she didn't scream or pull away. I told her it'd be okay, or something like that. Tried my best to sound reassuring. Tried to let her know I was going to get her somewhere safe. I managed to pull her to her feet when she finally turned and looked right past me. I barely existed to her at that moment. She only had eyes for the water behind me. Something about that look on her face gave me pause, though. She wasn't scanning for danger. She was looking right at something. And before I had a chance to look for myself, she started screaming. When I saw it, I wanted to scream too. I'd never seen anything like it, or since. A head like seaweed, a face like a scallop. It watched us with an almost casual interest that frightened me more than any predatory scowl. The look of a child about to pull a spider's leg off. The thought of it still makes my skin crawl. It was so still, so alien. I couldn't help but pause and wonder if I was looking at something real or if it was just bad special effects. And yet the moment stretched on and on, until something in that unknowable mind made a decision, and the creature disappeared back beneath the water. I made a decision too, and I dragged the young woman to the nearby boat where she started to fight me the moment she saw it. Can't say I blame her. Last time she was on it, she'd nearly died. But there was no third option. It was stay and die or take our chances getting to safety. Unfortunately, we had barely gotten within a meter of that thing when the whole boat was blown sky high with tremendous force. For a few seconds, I stood there dumbstruck. The girl crying, and the water falling from the sky like a momentary rainstorm. When the boat finally returned to Earth, it was a couple 100 meters away, and it hit dry land with a great crash. My stomach sank. How the hell were we going to get off the castle now? Not a moment later, and the entire structure began to shake. By now, the girl was close to hysterics, and I wasn't far behind. I took her hand and began to look for some high ground as that thing began to shake and batter the flimsy plastic supports that had held the platform up. We were forced to climb up towards the plastic roof of the tallest tower, which wasn't exactly all that high up, but it was the best we could do. The bars leading to it weren't easy to navigate, and at one point I slipped and fell backwards, striking my chin painfully and looking up to see the girl going ahead without me. For a moment, I nearly gave up, but then there was the sound of something snapping, and the entire castle began to slide on one side. I looked down and saw black water rising up to meet me. The thought of sinking into that filth ignited something inside me, and I scrambled up the last few rungs and perched on the top of the smooth, plastic cover of the castle's highest turret. It was barely large enough for us both to sit on, but it was all we had. Looking back, I can't help but laugh. I made it sound like a great tower, but it was barely 12 feet off the ground. As soon as I was up there looking down, water quickly bubbling towards us, I realized just how badly we were fucked. We delayed our inevitable death by mere seconds at most. By the time the bright red piece of plastic we clung to hit the water, the castle had broken apart, so all its little pieces went floating in different directions. Ours was the last to go in, and it went down beneath our collective weight until the water reached our waists. And then it came back up, buoyant and hollow. It was no boat, but it came damn close. "Paddle!" I cried at the girl, and she did, and we pulled ourselves through the water to the nearest edge. Pretty soon the makeshift raft bumped up against the tiled wall, and we were dragging ourselves up onto dry land where she rolled onto her back. I continued to crawl for another few meters until I felt like I was far enough away from the water. Only once I felt safe, I let myself collapse and lay crying and laughing for what felt like hours. But the girl only cried. At first a whimper, then a sob, and then a howl. A painful, gut-wrenching scream that made my own joy wilt, until I could do nothing except listen to the raw grief in her voice. When I sat up to see if she was okay, she was sitting upright and staring at the thing that was rising out of the water. Again, no malice. Not really. At least I don't think so. It'd be like looking for a recognizable expression on an oyster. But it did watch as calmly as it ate what I can only assume was one of her friends. A man, I think. Hard to remember details. He didn't cry, but he did look at us for help that we couldn't give. I'm not sure I could even tell you how it ate him, but it looked painful and slow. Reminiscent of a starfish, I think. At some point the girl passed out, and not long after, so did I. The only thing she managed to say, even hours later after the paramedics had sedated her and I'd finished giving my less than truthful statement to police, were the words, "The stars. The stars." Over and over. I think a lot about how changed I was when I first looked down into the water and saw the abyss below. But that poor girl was actually in it. She'd swam in those waters, submerged. I don't even know how she came back from an ocean that doesn't have a surface, but she did. And somehow I don't think she'll ever be the same. But it's got me thinking about myself, about what I've lost to it. Jesus Christ, I'll be 40 before I know it, and what then? Just gonna wait here forever and ever? There's a number on the back of my paychecks, and I want to try calling it to find out more. Like, what would they do if I tried going somewhere else? Would they let me? Because it's gone. The days of Ellen Ditzworth are gone. The days of a good back and strong legs are gone. The person I was before I saw that drifter die is gone. Yesterday is gone. The past is a shared hallucination. Only the present is real. I need to get out of here before I lose more of myself. I'm never gonna understand this place. I realize that now. I can only accept that it exists and try to move on, which I should have done the day I saw those stars. Because there is an abyss, and it doesn't flow through time like we do. It doesn't occupy space like we do. But it's there, and it's full of gods the way a koi pond is full of fish. And I'm worried the more I think about it, the worse the park gets. and the closer I get to falling into waters and have no up or down, and which never ever end. In my dreams, I am choking in the acidic bile of a creature that swallowed me whole. I'm worried that if I stay here much longer, I'll forget how to wake up.